Welcome to another episode of 30 Minutes with DailyStraits.com. I am your host, June Ramli. Our guest today is David Chiem, the founder of MindChamps, a leading education movement that has taken the world by storm. David's story of going from rags to riches is truly inspiring, and his champion mindset has helped him build a highly successful brand in the competitive Singapore preschool space. MindChamps has now expanded to over 8 countries, and it has caught the attention of best-selling author Joseph A. Micheley, who describes it as a calling, a revolution, and a movement. David's background in the arts and his best-selling books, including Deeper Than the Ocean, The Three Mind Revolution, and Trinity Leadership, have helped him become a highly sought-after speaker and leader in the education industry. Join us as we learn more about David's incredible journey and the MindChamps movement. Thank you for joining us today. How are you, David?
I'm very good, June. How are you today?
I am super well. Thank you for asking. So let's dive right into the question. So David, you have a very interesting background. So can you tell us in your own words your rags to riches story and how it inspired you to create MindChamps?
Look, June, I can tell you the part about the rags, but I'm not sure about the riches. We did arrive, I did come to Australia in fact, in 1978 as both refugees from Vietnam. Yes, we did arrive with absolutely, literally nothing. And I still remember the very first time, we stood on Australian soil, land in Australia. It was an extremely emotional moment for my family, as you can imagine, through the whole escape and the whole journey on the boat. But finally, when we made it to Australia and stood on Australian soil, my dad was quite emotional, and he said this, and this left a huge impact on me as a 9-year-old. And at 9 years old, you remember everything. This was a very powerful moment for me. And Dad said that, when we stood on the Australian soil, finally, he was quite emotional. He said, for every one of us that made it, someone died. And those were the real stats of the refugees who they could count that made it. In fact, there were many lost at sea that never made it. And the real stats were that in fact, the stats are that about only 47% made it. So when Dad said that to me, it left a huge, deep impression on me in terms of which form a very important mindset. That is, he literally said that it's our rebirth. That the fact that we are here it's a rebirth, and so it left a deep mindset that said to me that whatever I was going to be doing, number one, it had to contribute to mankind, and there's a reason why you're here, because you could have not been here. We had many relatives who didn't make it, and so and then it also left a very deep mindset to be grateful, just to be grateful for everything that we have every day. In fact, I always say this to our team at MindChamps, that every day, we're actually living in somebody's dream, and some people say, well, really, David, last week I had a terrible week, life's not been good. And I say, but whatever it is, we're living in somebody else's dream. And they said, no, and I said, well, look, let me ask you this question. When you woke up this morning, in fact, I can ask you, June. Yeah. Yes. When you woke up this morning, what was one of the first things that you did when you woke up? One of the first things. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I'm not a lot of people are not grateful enough for what they have.
Yes. You see, most of us wake up, and one of the first things we do is we go to the bathroom, go to the toilet. Yes. And I always say, well, when you went to the toilet this morning, how did you get there? And I would say, well, I said, they said, what do you mean? I said, well, how did you get to the toilet from the bed to the toilet? How did you get there? And they said, well, I walked there. Ah, you walked there. Ah, you actually just walked to the toilet. I said, well, we have one of our team members at MindChamps. He's an incredible person. But since he was two, his family missed out just one vaccine over 60 years ago, and he got polio. And for the last 60 years, he's been in a wheelchair his whole life. I'm sure that every day his parents would have prayed and wished if their son could just walk to the bathroom on his own. That would be a dream come true. So that mindset of never taking anything for granted kind of left a very, very strong impressions that I've always been grateful for everything that we do. And so much so that when I went to on my first day at school in Sydney in Australia at Cabramatta West Primary School, I remember I didn't speak a word of English, literally, not even hello. And on that day when I started, it was in the middle of winter when we arrived in Australia, so it was freezing cold for us. We've never experienced, even smoke coming out of our mouths and so on. And so I remember being on the first day at school, teacher came in and she asked me, what is your name? I was the only student starting on this day. And she wanted to introduce me to the class. And I just sat there and froze and looked at her. I was so nervous, didn't understand what she was saying. So she started to use sign language. My name, Miss, I still remember her name, Miss Cadogan, you are. I was so nervous, I just sat there and froze. And then this young girl turned and said to me in my language, she pulled my arm, she said, hey, psst, teacher's asking you what's your name, stupid. Yes. And I remember when she said that, I was so nervous, I started crying. And then I thought, wow, just because I don't speak the language doesn't mean I'm stupid. And then in that moment I thought, wow, my dad also said one other thing, and he said that we love you so much, but the only thing we can ever give you is education, and the right education. He said that all the things we give you can be taken away from you just like that. The only thing we can give you that no one can take away is your education. And we came from a place where everything was taken away from us overnight. That's why we escaped. And so, wow. So, when that girl said that word and my dad had left that deep impression that how important it is. So for education, I thought, wow, I'm going to learn. I mean, every day in class, I was constantly hungry to learn. I was just, and every minute I wanted to learn and learn and learn. And if I didn't know something, I would ask. And so, yeah, I mean, that left a very strong impression and imprint in my mind. And I would say to this day, it formed kind of like the blueprint, the imprint for who I am, which is why I'm so passionate about education. And what education does, and then I realized that, however, that education for years was focusing, I would say, there's a gap in the story of education globally. And that's why, I started to want to fill in this gap, but it kind of, the roots of all that came back all the way since my first day at school, and, what my dad had always, deeply, imprinted in my mind, that is to be grateful, to be so keen to learn, but at the same time, what education does. And in fact, I share this as a through all my life, of all the things I've ever attained or achieved, or one of the proudest moments was at the end of that year, 1978, in Cabramatta West Primary School. By the end of that year, guess which student topped the class? Yes. Yes. Yeah, and I remember being given the certificate, which I still have. I keep it safely. 1978 for topping that class, and then that's why I still remember my teacher's name. And that was a moment that I wanted to make my parents very proud. And I think that mindset continued throughout my whole life. So much so that even when I went to from there, I went on to work in the theater world. My mind was always about how can I keep on learning and keep on learning. Yeah, so I hope does that kind of help.
Yeah, very, very beautiful answer, and very a great answer. Okay, so how did you build a successful brand in Singapore? Because and it's also a very in the preschool space. So you're from two different countries, and then why did you like go to Singapore? Like, what was the thinking behind that? And
Yes.
I also spoke to other business people before. They said starting up in Singapore is not easy, but you managed to go through all the hurdles and you've got a successful brand there. So give us the whole lowdown, like why you went there and how you did this.
Yeah. Well, look, great question. Why Singapore? Especially since we started, actually, MindChamps started in 1998 as a very small, tiny, like, when I say small, I mean small, because we had nothing when we started. Research, team center in Sydney in 98. So people always ask me, why Singapore when you started the research there? And I realized, in fact, in education, globally, we kind of been putting things a bit upside down, first and foremost. And in society, we always been thinking that, oh, university is everything. For example, if I was to ask most people today, what are the top brands of universities around the world? What are the number 1, 2, 3 brands? Your mind is already preoccupied. That space is taken. Sure. For example, what brands comes to your mind in university? Well, I'm sure brands like Harvard, Oxford, MIT comes to your mind. Sure. They already preoccupy your space. Why? Because society, we've been saying university is everything in education. Well, in fact, we've been putting this upside down. In society, what I saw was this is a huge gap, and in 98, when we, looking at this, I thought that, wow, in the 21st century, where AI, ChatGPT 3 and 4, now part of our life, the world is no longer about the what you learn. It's about how you learn, the craft of learning, how you learn, and the mindset of the learner. The what, when we went to school 5 days a week, the what is gone. And in fact, AI can outdo us in the what, and even in thinking. But the mindset of the learner is far more critical. So we should be nurturing mindset, not just what you learn. And so guess what? Research shows that the child's mindset between 0 and 6 is the most critical time. So therefore, if it's about nurturing mindset, you can't just switch on like a tap or switch a person's mindset when they're 19 years old. Why aren't you more creative, confident? Why don't you have what our research shows is the champion mindset? Why don't you have that? Now, this has got to be nurtured from young. And so we realized that when we did this research, to take it to the world, we wanted to test it in one of the most rigorous, and you're right, June, Singapore is, especially in the early childhood education space, it's the most rigorous. And in fact, in terms of the Singapore's ranking in education globally, in the PISA tests every year, globally, Singapore ranks up there, number 1 in top in maths and science, right up there. Why? Because it is one of the most rigorous, highest of standards, and most competitive landscape. And apart from that, if you know, Singapore is a very small country, so therefore, as a brand, if you don't make it, everybody knows immediately. And so why Singapore? I thought, wow, if we're going to tell this story to the world and create a new model of education, I wanted to test it in the most rigorous, most competitive, highest of standards environment. I thought because Singapore, apart from being that, it's also the gateway. Geographically, Singapore is the gateway to the East and the West. And in fact, the world, the Middle East as well. And Singapore, so as most people would know, English is the first language, with Chinese as the main second language. And so it is truly the gateway, and that's why I thought let's really test this in Singapore. Because if we can't make it there, then how can we say we're going to create a world movement? So it was quite clear. In fact, when I decided on that, I remember the professor, our chair of research, Professor Alan Snyder, who at the time was the 150th chair of the University of Sydney. He's a world-renowned neuroscientist, Professor Alan Snyder. And I said to him, let's test this in Singapore. And remember, he said this. He said, David, especially, he used this concept 2,000 years ago. If you want to test something, you test it in Rome. In Rome, yes. And he said, Singapore, in the 21st century, especially education, it's Rome. Yes. And so it was very clear. We said, if we're going to prove this model to the world, let's do it in Singapore. And then from there, we would then take it to the world, which is what we're doing now. In this phase, we're now in 8 other countries, and we're actually not just in Australia as well, but we're also now in the US. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So what makes MindChamp different from other preschool and enrichment centers in the market? So you did mention just now a bit, but what is your unique selling? Like, what is the unique selling point,
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's look, first and foremost, when I saw that there was a gap in education globally, okay, and there's a gap within the gap. And the first gap is that education, as you know, since the Industrial Revolution, there was no formal school system until the Industrial Revolution. Yeah, first and foremost. Yeah. And at that time, education was about pouring information into the child's brain. And in fact, only the rich got educated prior to that. And the peasants were just the laborers, yeah, before the Industrial Revolution. And in fact, most people were illiterate. They couldn't even read and write. Did you know that back then, society used to think that to read and write, you have to have a certain IQ. But that's not correct. Every child, the brain is amazing. Every child can learn to read and write. You don't have to have a certain IQ. But back then, yeah, the peasants were illiterate, couldn't even read and write. And so when the Industrial Revolution came, yeah, society changed. And obviously, we said, oh, we need to form a school system so that let's teach them to read and write. The more facts they have, the more obviously, smarter they would be for society to be competitive. And then that was the 19th century. By the 20th century, there was another major revolution in the world. And that's when we call the information revolution, where computers came. And obviously, the world of, internet. And so suddenly we said, oh, content, drilling the child's information in their brain is no longer enough because you can put the information in the computer and it's everywhere. So now curriculum around the world said, well, we need to start thinking curriculum. Yeah, not just content, but to nurture thinking. At MindChamps, we thought, wow, 21st century, as I mentioned earlier, in the world of AI, and in our book, The 3-Mind Revolution, we coined this concept that the 21st century is the century of the mind. If the 19th century was the century of the machines, and 20th century was the century of the computers, 21st century is the century of the mind. We need to nurture the mindset, because in the world of AI, AI can already outthink the world's #1 chess player. Yeah. Now, so when we started, we thought, wow, we need to solve this global problem, this gap, to teach not the what, but the how, not the content, not just even the thinking, but the mindset as well. Okay? And so with that in mind, we actually did empirical studies and research on 3 areas, because we thought, what kind of mindset should we be nurturing in the 21st century? So let's say if a child comes to a preschool today, they're only 2 years old. By the time they face the real world, when they finish preschool, primary school, high school, yeah, do a basic diploma degree, that's almost 20 years time. What year would that be? That would be the year, wow, 2000, as you know, 2043. Now, the question is, what kind of world would that be? Even futurists can't predict that completely, but we can say what kind of mindset do you need in that world to be competitive? You need to have the champion mindset. You have to have the creative mind. You have to have the learning mind, and not just what you learn, but how you learn. You have to know the craft of learning and love learning constantly. In fact, Alvin Toffler, when we first, came across this book called Future Shock, Alvin Toffler, who is a futurist, said this. And I think, but having said that, I think education system around the world kind of missed this, what he was trying to say. And he said this. He said that the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read and write. He said the illiterate of the 21st century are those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Now, in the world of AI, that is so relevant. What did he mean? And when I saw that, I thought, wow, from our perspective at MindChamps, when Toffler said the illiterate are not those who can learn, I don't think it's about what you learn. The content is everywhere. Everybody has it. It's about how you learn. It's the art of learning itself. The system didn't teach us that. Then you can keep on loving to learn. So the second part, when he said unlearn and relearn, well, what is that about? That's about mindset. The mindset of the learner, because if your mindset is not right, there is no unlearning and therefore no relearning. And so when he said learn, unlearn, and relearn, I said that's about how you learn and about the mindset of the learner. So that's what the DNA of MindChamps began with, the research of that. And so we said, what kind of mindset do children need? We said there were three minds: the champion, the creative, and the learning. So what separates us from every other, sincerely, I can say this sincerely, in fact, this year, since we started in 98, is our 25th year, Jubilee Silver Anniversary. Yes, and this has been that long. We said we must, if we're going to create a revolution in new mode of education, we have to have true, real, substantial research, empirical, primary research in the three areas of how to nurture the mind in the area of the champion, the creative, and learning. In fact, the champion mindset research was based on Prof. Snyder, Prof. Alan Snyder's research, and that was done during the Sydney Olympics. Yeah, it's part of the Olympic event itself, and it was done again during the Beijing Olympics. So the Sydney Olympics campaign, which Prof. Snyder, chaired and hosted, was called "What Makes Champions?" What makes a champion? And we wanted to study champions from 5 areas: business, politics, arts, sports, and science. What is that ingredient that separates these people who make breakthroughs in these 5 fields in society? So we had people like Mandela, the incredible Mandela, to the people like Branson, to the Ian Thorpes of the world, Olympics people who broke world records, to artistic people who won international prizes in art and Nobel Prize winners. What is it that separates these people who make breakthroughs? And it's not just talking about success, yeah? We're not just talking about success, society success. Oh, you became a lawyer, doctor, and they're successful. No, we weren't interested in that. We were looking at what is that mindset, that ingredient that separates these people who make world breakthroughs. And that was the beginning of the study of the champion mindset. So MindChamps, we are truly the only organization globally that has that empirical research to then go on to create from the research to the practical application of how do you bring and nurture the champion mindset in young children, because that is the time. A child's mindset is already formed. Yeah. And so how do you nurture it from young and not wait until we become adults and try and switch out? Yeah. So that's what separates us. And then the research of the creative and the learning mind formed what we call the 3 minds. And we actually wrote and penned a book called The 3 Mind Revolution about that. And I suppose years later, that's why you mentioned earlier, Dr. Joseph A. Michelli, who is New York Times #1 and Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and he studied companies like Mercedes-Benz, Ritz-Carlton, Starbucks, Airbnb, and when he got to know about our research and our approach to education, and he investigated us for about 10 years. He then, wanted to write a book, and I was just so blown away when he wanted to write the book about, MindChamps, and he called it the MindChamps way, and held us as an education movement for the 21st century. But the origins of all that came from substantial research, and it's about, as I mentioned, nurturing the child's mindset, not just the content or the thinking. That's a given. Any school of today, anybody, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can set up their own early learning center, childcare, preschool, if they want to, anywhere in the world. That's fact. And often when they do that, they would, and here's what most people do when they set up a preschool business. They will put, on their website, they've got great curriculum. Because nobody says they've got bad curriculum. Yes. And then they always say that they've got, obviously research, which they kind of like cut and paste from somewhere. But MindChamps were very, very big on that. that everything we do, the child's mind during this phase, and we even tell all of our teachers who go through extensive, up to 200 hours of training, regardless of their formal qualifications, we insist on this mandatory training because they have to learn the latest research, how to nurture the child. And so we're very big on making sure that the entire curriculum is based on solid research and training. If you have the research, how can you turn that into practical application? And how can you train the teachers to bring it to life consistently? That's the key. Without that, it's just all research that sits on a shelf.
Awesome. Okay, that's a very good explanation. So I just need to ask this question. So how is I think you've already answered this, but I wanted to ask you, what are your plans for your future growth? So you mentioned a lot about AI, ChatGPT. So in the journalism world, like companies like BuzzFeed, they just got rid of their journalists. I read it. They got a bunch of journalists laid off, and they're going to replace them with ChatGPT. So I don't know about your business, because your business is dealing with a lot of people. Like you need educators, and then your customers, your end customers are children. So do you think your business, basically the preschool business, will be impacted by this revolution, this AI revolution that's coming on?
Yes. Look, and that's a great question, June, and you're right. In many industries, AI, general AI will disrupt. And in fact, I gave a talk during the pandemic. One of the major banks, I gave a talk at one of their forums, and one of the questions that they asked me was, they said, David, disruption, which is what you're referring to. In this case, it's real. AI disruption. They said, disruption, is it a good or bad word in business? Yes. And I said, well, in fact, it's to me, it's neither good or bad. Disruption, is life. It's part of life. It's neither good or bad. It's life. And if you're an entrepreneur, you need to be prepared, for anything that comes. However, disruption is only not good if you're not prepared. Now, whatever, the pandemic hit the whole world. Every business went through it. Sure. Everybody went through it. Now, those countries that are more prepared than others, the disruption is not as bad. However, disruption is life. So therefore, as entrepreneurs, we need to make sure that we are absolutely not just prepared, but deeply prepared, for all the disruptions that are coming, and that's already here. And AI is just one of them. So within our industry, look, having said that, how do you prepare your team members' readiness for disruption? Well, apart from many strategies that any company can put in place, but really it's about mindset. In fact, one of the talks that I gave as well was about how during the pandemic, how does one company thrive and another fold? Why? And I really think it's about the mindset. How we prepare and nurture the mindset of our people to be resilient, to be absolutely creative, to be able to, with 100% respect, understand the depth of things, but zero fear, to create something uniquely different, to create something from nothing where others see nothing. How do we create something that others see nothing? To see opportunities as a mindset, to see opportunities when others see, obviously the disruption, the bad things. But during those times, how do you see opportunities? And so ultimately, how do you prepare? It's about mindset. Got to nurture that mindset. Once we nurture that mindset, no matter what comes to us in life, especially our children, we can't predict what the year 243 is going to be like. But those who have the champion, the creative, and the mind, the learning mind deeply already nurtured from young, they're resilient, they're confident, they're not, they have that, like I mentioned, 100% respect to understand things deeply. That's another key thing. To respect things, to understand it deeply, so you can go wide. But there are a lot of young people today who want to go wide and just challenge things quickly without understanding the depth. That's a mindset. So at MindChamps, we nurture that. The part of the champion mindset is to nurture the philosophy of 100% respect first. To respect everything, respect other people's ideas and perspectives, to respect the universe, to respect everything. But at the same time, to have zero fear to celebrate what is uniquely you. Now, if every child can, from in our preschools, by the time they get to primary school, they have the confidence when they go to primary school. If they don't know something, and they have the confidence to ask with respect, and then have zero fear to be able to take what they've learned, to create, to synthesize it, and to make it uniquely them. Now, so in our space, nurturing young children from young, fortunately, I would say that most parents probably wouldn't want an AI to look after your 2-year-old. Yes, yeah. Now, having said that, though, the content in education, I believe AI will be able to teach that faster. The content, okay, the basic fundamental content and skills. However, what AI will be very, very difficult AI to do is what the human beings we can do. That's why 25 years ago, I said education, 21st century, is not about the content. It's about nurturing the mindset and the values. The values and that human connection. You still need a real human being to be your child's teacher. That's so critical. So in our space, I believe that it's still critical to have real human beings to nurture young children. But by the time they get to primary school, the basics and fundamental concepts of math and science of that, I believe AI would be able to really teach that so well. So teachers, therefore, should be teaching mindset and values, not so much just the fundamental content.
I just wanted to ask you, so I did a bit of research about you, and I was very surprised to find that you're a filmmaker. So, and you actually went to AFTERS in Sydney, if I'm not mistaken, right? Did you take a, so okay, so how did that background in the arts influence your work in education? Because they're two different things. And how did you incorporate that experience of filmmaking into the MindChamps curriculum?
Yes, well, look, you've done your homework. Yeah, look, you're right. Great question. You're also right that my background in both theater and the cinema world has, massively influenced how I see education. But why? Yeah. In fact, in 1984, this is how my career in the acting world started. Yeah. In 1984, wow, that's a long time ago. That's about 39 years ago. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I was 14, so you know my age now. Yes. In fact, in 1984, in Australia back then, there was no Asian that had ever been casted in a starring role. And so in 1984, I was the first Asian Australia casted to star in a drama series. And so that shifted my whole paradigm in life. Yeah. Because prior to that, my dad had always said I was going to be a doctor. Yes. And that was a very different, different direction. But so at 14, when I got casted in that role, my whole mind and world opened up to something very different. And I got to learn at 14 the entire professional world of storytelling. In fact, I was so hungry to learn. I loved it so much. I loved the notion of being able to tell stories to the world that could make a difference. And as you know, as I shared earlier, at 9 years old, I really wanted to, everything that I was going to do, I wanted to make a difference. And so I thought, wow, through storytelling, such a powerful way to be able to really reach human beings and tell stories to make a difference. Yeah. Now, so when I then finished my HSC in Sydney, I didn't go to medical school. I went to acting school. It wasn't easy to tell my dad. Yes. As you know, we came as refugees, and obviously he would have wanted me to, at that time, for in society's terms, go and do medicine, sure, become a doctor. So when I told Dad I was going to study acting, it was a big thing. Yeah. I even had to wait until I auditioned and got into the school before I told him, because just because you get the marks, if you get the marks, you can get into medical school. But just because you get the marks doesn't mean you get into acting school. Yes, because every year they audition 30, and they take, and I remember they audition all around Australia and New Zealand to take 30 students every year. And so I had to wait until I got in, and because of my prior experience, I managed to get into that school, and it was called the Theatre Nepean. And so I studied that first. It was a Bachelor of Theatre, performing arts. So I studied acting first, and then after that, I realized that I want to go deeper. So I went to the University of Technology in Sydney and studied, did a Bachelor of Communication and majored in film, in cinema. And then after that, you're right, I then went to the Australian Film, Television and Radio School and graduated there in 95. Yeah. So I studied both acting and behind the camera, producing, writing, directing, to understand the craft of filmmaking. Yeah. And in fact, it was in 95 when I was at the film school that I had the epiphany, the intellectual epiphany for wanting to set up and tell the story in education. And in that year, I remember the first day at the film school, the head of the school came in and he said this to us. He said, "Congratulations, you're here because you have talent." And he said, "But now that you're here, park your talent somewhere else. We're not interested in your talent." And I thought, what's that about? And he said, "Now that you're here to learn the craft." He said, "It's the craft that will lift your talents to heights you never realize." He said, "Talent, there's lots of people with talent. And those who rely on mere talent will eventually max out." He said, "It's the craft." He said, "No one achieved greatness without learning the craft." And I thought, wow, that's the link. That was when I had the intellectual epiphany. I thought, wow, we spend 5 days a week at school. Yeah? If you think about it, in primary school, high school, we spend 5 days a week, every day, 5 days a week at school. We learned the what to learn. The system never taught us the craft, the art of learning how to learn. Now, that's why so many children, because I used to contemplate this, why there's so many people who go to 12 years of schooling and fail the very fundamental subjects like maths, and still hate numbers to this very day. And I said, yet maths is exactly the same. You do the same thing, you get the same result. Algebra hasn't changed for the last 50 years. And yet the students who still fail, wow, maybe we got drilled in the what, but we never learned the craft of learning how to. So when the head of the school said that to me at the film school, he left a very big intellectual epiphany for me. That's when I thought, education, there's a gap. This story needs to be told. And in fact, I wanted to tell the story, that story first. At the beginning, I wanted to tell it as a documentary. And then when I did deep research into this and interviewed a lot of people from education, like the professors of education, about this, I realized, wow, education has been living in its own silo. That is, in society, why are there gaps? Because sometimes we operate all in silos. And I mean, even within education, for example, do you remember when we were at school studying mathematics? We study, not only is English separate, science separate, maths is separate, art is over there, everything's in silo. We never saw the connections. But even within mathematics, we study maths in silos. You finish one topic, algebra, finish. Move on to the next topic. Whether you understood this topic or not, you just move on to, let's say, geometry. In geometry, you go to trigonometry. But we never saw the relationship. we saw everything in silos. So when I started to research this as a documentary, I think, wow, this story is even deeper. And to solve this problem, I couldn't solve this just by telling one documentary. Even if we make a great documentary, yeah, the world's still not going to change. I thought we need to create the new model of education. And to solve this in the education system globally, we need to create a new model using 4 domains, not just the silo of education. Why? Because when I studied theater and cinema, I realized the tool of engagement is critical. And I thought, wow, education and theater essentially, it's about the same thing. It's about engagement. Yes. But education, when I interviewed a lot of the teachers, they didn't understand and learn the craft of engagement the way that we in the theater and the cinema world had to learn. You can have the best script, best curriculum. Yeah. In the world of theater, it's called the script. In the world of education, it's called the curriculum. You can take Shakespeare's Hamlet. It's a great script, great curriculum. We know that if we give it to one teacher, the child can either be bored, yes, same script, same curriculum, or give it to another teacher, another director, and they can bring it to life in a way that engages you and you love and you learn so much. And Shakespeare, you realize, was an incredible philosopher that taught us many things about life and humanity. Wow. So that's when I thought, ooh, you can take the same script, different director, totally different outcome. You can take the same curriculum, algebra, different teacher. You can either hate maths or love it, and it's part of your life. That's when I saw the parallel. Oh, and so I thought, but we must bring 2 other worlds to bring this to life. And because I came from the arts, not from the business background or the education background, I thought to tell this story, we better tell this with real substance of latest scientific research. Otherwise, they might think, we're a bit arty-farty. Yes. And so I thought we must back this with the latest research in education, latest research in the second domain, psychology. In society, we thought to educate, we must understand behavior. But then there's another gap. I thought to understand behavior, most teachers that I interviewed didn't know enough about neuroscience. The brain science, what is the latest research showed about how the child's brain processes information and forms mindsets. Oh, rather than blaming the child and say, oh, why are you so, disruptive in class? And perhaps they're because they're not engaged. When you think, like, for example, you show children all around the world a movie like Coco. You've seen Coco?
Yeah.
Amazing, yeah. You show children a movie like Coco, and the kids are engaged. You don't need to tell, be quiet, sit down, shut up. Why? Because when the human mind is engaged, curiosity is at its optimum. And the high state of learning is curiosity. So when a child's mind is engaged and curious, they love learning. And when we teach them the right method of learning, the craft of learning, the art of learning, not drill them until they hate it, suddenly they love learning, and their mindset is very different to learning. Their relationship to learning becomes very, very strong. And so I thought, wow, my background in theater and cinema taught me that ultimately you can have the best script if you don't engage, which is what the work of the director does. You can give the same script. You can take the same novel, Lord of the Rings, you give it to a different director, it could be a flop. You give it to Peter Jackson, even though it's more than 3 hours, people are engaged. Yes. And so I realized that, wow, there's incredible parallels, but we must back it up with research. Research in psychology, in brain, neuroscience, research in education, but we bring the world of theater, which is the final domain, the 4 as one. So when we train, I mentioned earlier that when we train our teachers, this is why all teachers must go through the MindChamps way of training, regardless of their formal background and qualifications. in teaching. And so this is what makes us uniquely us. And we're actually the only group globally that synthesizes using these 4 domains. Yeah. And from that, I was able to bring that together, and then in a way, my learning as a producer in the the movie world helped me a lot. And the first thing I had realized is, if you want to tell this story to the world, create a new education model, you got to really have the substance of a powerful what's it about script. What's it about script? Your business, what's it about? Yeah. What's the soul of it? What's it about? And then stay focused on telling that story. And then you got to cast the right people. Yes. So and that's where leadership, I realized, wow, to build any company, yeah, you've got to learn the craft of leadership. Got to learn the craft of leadership, because until you have great leadership in any organization, and any organization is a reflection of its leader. And so we're very big on that. We actually create a unique model of training for leaders at MindChamps. And now we actually have a few thousand of us around the world, but it comes back to the fundamental of leadership as an entire team globally. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So I am very interested into knowing where you got your first, I know a lot of filmmakers and they don't make much money. So because it's a hard gig. You either make it or you don't. And some of them you have second jobs, because filmmaking is a very hard business. So you have gone and done that and gone to Singapore, like a very hard country, to start a business. So can you just tell me, right, where did you get the money? Like, in Singapore, everything is money. And then where did you get your first, money to start the business, basically? Did you get a bank loan, or did your family give you money? What is the backstory on that?
Yeah, look, we really did start it with very, very little, almost nothing. Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting you compare it to the movie world, because it's about how can you create a great script. And then suddenly when you have a great script, you find the right people who's prepared to invest in you. Yeah. And ultimately, it's what's that script about, and what's the story? And if you have nothing at all, how can you create, obviously, for people to want to invest into it? That's why I come back to the fundamental of that. And so look, when we first started, we really did have nothing. I did a lot of deep research, and that you can do. And once you have that, you can write your own very, very clear script. And when you have that, and then what we did was once we had the research, we then wrote some, at the time, pilot programs, some short programs to test it. And so from that, we kind of like tested that. And when we tested it, we then took it to market to kind of like, in a way, pilot test it with a small audience. Yeah. And at that stage, we were able to generate a little bit of income from testing it with a small audience. And then when that, was successful, suddenly, obviously, you have people who want to invest and support you. Not too dissimilar to, getting a movie up. Yes. And then obviously I was so blessed when I mentioned earlier, Professor Alan Snyder, who had, when we had nothing, and he's like a fellow of the Royal Society. And if you don't know who are in the leagues of the fellow of the Royal Society, Einstein, Newton is in the league of that, the fellow of the Royal Society. And he's made breakthrough for mankind in 3 different fields. In fact, the very fact that we have the internet today, and he won the Marconi Prize for that. Marconi Prize is equivalent to the like the Nobel Prize in telecommunications, and he made breakthroughs in many fields, including telecommunication. So to better have him come and join us, people always say, how did we manage to do that? And I suppose it's similar in the movie world. How do you get the A grade star to want to be part of your story? You got to have a great script. And so when he came on board as a scientist, then the bar was at that level, and we were able to get the best of the best researchers from education, from psychology, from neuroscience to join us to come together and create something so unique, because suddenly it was no longer just about what we make. It was about telling this story and wanting to change education globally. It became larger than us. And so suddenly it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about, what we can pay people, because the people like Prof. Snyder and all these incredible, scientific world leaders in their field was not about the money. In fact, they don't believe in the story, that no matter what you pay them, they still won't do it. Yeah. And so therefore, first and foremost, it was about finding the clarity of that. And so I that was so obviously so clear in the theater and the movie world. So I brought that to the business world to make sure that we had absolute depth of clarity of research of what we're doing. And then how do we write the script and then cast the right people? And from that, we brought it to Singapore and tested here. But by that stage, we did have solid research. And because we had the research, it catapulted us to separate us. In fact, when we came to Singapore, I said to the team that, very few of us back then, I said, we're not just, if we were at the Olympics, we're not just at the starting line. And in business, the first 100 meters is a sprint. If you don't make it through that, you're left behind already. And I said that, we're not just at the starting line. We're 30 years behind some of the most established preschool brands of Singapore. Yeah, and there are, established brands that have been around for more than 30 years. I said we're 30 years behind. How are we not just going to catch up? That's one thing. Then overtake and take the number one. It was clear. Take the number one premium preschool space of Singapore. And overtake that and take the number one position, which is what we've done. We actually, in Singapore, we hold 38.5% of the premium range of Singapore preschool market space, and then became the first and the only to be publicly listed on the main board of the Stock Exchange of Singapore. Yeah. So I would say that some of the fundamental principles that I learned in both theater and cinema, like you said, because the training there is fantastic. And in fact, I studied both theater and cinema for about 7 years. And to this very day, I would say that the core of who we are is about having that clarity, of being able to create a model that can scale by having clarity of that story. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so this is going to be the last question. So I wanted to ask you, a lot of companies were very shocked when COVID-19 happened, because it was like something that they never expected.
Yeah.
But now most companies, big companies, right, they have a blueprint to refer to if something like that ever happens again. So what did MindChamps do? And what are going to be your next kind of like go-to methods if something like this does recur again,
Okay, yes. So what's our preparation if there's another global pandemic? Yes. Yeah, look, for us, obviously, to be prepared, as I mentioned, deeply as a mindset that, obviously things will continue to disrupt. How can we continually to be resilient and flexible and, ready to evolve quickly? Yeah. Obviously, some of the fundamentals which we put in place are the entire system of how to engage, obviously, online. Yeah, I mean, most companies have done that. But what we also did was we make sure that we created a training to train the teachers, because, and I said this to the team at the time. I said that teaching and training online, again, it's a bit like in the theater world, acting on stage. Live in the classroom is very different to acting to camera. Yes, yeah, there's a different craft. When you're acting to camera, there's a slightly different craft to acting live on stage. So we make sure that all of our teachers got extra training on how to engage on camera. Yeah, because obviously the technology is there and everybody has the same technology, but whether you engage or not, that's a different space. Sure. So therefore, we were very big on preparing the mindset and the training of all of our team to be able to maximize and the technology in a way that where engagement is more critical. So we've been investing quite a lot on that space to make sure that obviously our online space is not just ever ready, but in terms of creating something that's far more engaging and training the whole entire team, to be prepared for that. And creating our own few studios so that we can engage students using multiple cameras, as well. And so those are the things that we put in place. But I would say ultimately, it's about leadership and training leaders, and what we call at MindChamps 360-degree leadership. So every person is a leader within their own space. We even have this acronym called CIC, that who's the CIC, which stands for Commander in Charge. So every single person is the commander in charge of their area. You are the leader of that. Take charge. So we train that mindset. So if everybody has that mindset to be the leader in the area of charge, they can then be empowered to keep on evolving, and coming up with new strategic, creative ways to obviously operate and to create. So that's one of the things that we've done to program not just the skill set, but to nurture the mindset of our team. I think that's far more critical. That's the most valuable commodity in the 21st century. Right? In fact, Prof. Snyder said this. He said that what makes a champion, it's not the skill set. What makes a champion is a champion mindset. And it's a champion mindset that's a transferable commodity, not the skill itself. Like you mentioned earlier, some of the industries, AI, if you're only very good at, like, for example, typing and programming certain things, so AI can outdo that skill set fast. So it's not the skill set, it's the mindset that is the transferable commodity. And therefore, what we heavily invest in is nurturing the most valuable commodity, the mindset of our team.
Okay, but I have a follow-up question. That I got a lot of complaints from parents saying that online learning is not suitable for young kids because they don't have attention span.
Yeah.
And you said during the pandemic, the parents were also at home working from home. So they had a hard time juggling full-time work. And then on top of that, they had to look after the kids to make sure the kids were engaged with the online tutoring. So how did you overcome that? How does MindChamp overcome short attention span for children? They cannot do online training like university students, you see.
Yes, no, that's a very good point. In fact, obviously for the early years, preschool, it is ideal to be live, obviously, for young children. Having said that, during the pandemic, when we ran online and activities and lessons, sincerely, we because we train our teachers on how to engage. As I mentioned, just because you're a great teacher in the classroom doesn't mean you can engage online. But when you learn the craft of engagement online, and we use special ways to engage them with certain tools, the children at home were actually far more engaged. And in fact, it was amazing. Most of the parents said that by the time, even though the pandemic and it was fully locked down, at a certain time when the child is online, the parents said the child was totally engaged, and they would be with the teacher and connect with other children, and they would feel like they're in the classroom. So it's truly about training our educators, our teachers, how to engage. Okay? In fact, you can have, like I mentioned, you can have the same script, and you can have the same technology shooting thing. You can have $100 million, special effects movie, but if you don't engage by creating incredible, characters that engage, the curiosity, the relationships, you feel nothing. True. So it's not too dissimilar to that. But obviously, for most parents, yes, they do need to work. So therefore, during the full day, it is still ideal to be in an environment where children can literally physically play with other children and learn together. That social, emotional, engagement is critical. But obviously during lockdown, we still have to be able to engage the students at home. So, but what we can say to you is that our parents they were very grateful that we could engage the children for those hours. And in fact, most of them, especially in Singapore, all of our what we call champs, they wear the MindChamps uniform, and the parents would say to us that the moment the child, just even at home, the moment at 9 a.m. when they put on a uniform and they hear the teacher's voice online, they're already there. Yes, yeah. And yet at home they're just running around. Yes. Why? Because the mindset of learning is positive at MindChamps. So the moment they hear the voice of the teacher, it's a positive feeling. And so non-consciously, they're already, wow, I want to learn. Yeah, we have many children, who come to our preschool, and when the parents pick them up, and sincerely, I went into the lift of our headquarters once, and when I was going downstairs, there was a child who was his grandfather came to pick him up, and as we're going down the lift, I could hear him just like almost crying, complaining to his granddad, why you pick me up so early? Why are you picking me up so early today? Yes, because he loves learning there. And just like us, the moment we have a positive relationship to something, I mean, if you have a positive relationship with a person and you meet up with each other, you just share everything and you engage with each other. But if you don't have a positive relationship with another person, you see each other, there's not much to talk about. Sure. So learning is the same. It's about how do we nurture that, whether it's online or at home. And it's not about screen time, because we're not talking about playing games on a computer game all the whole day. We're talking about live interaction with the teacher and other children. Yeah. In fact, what was amazing as well was during that period, the pandemic, we had our children here with our teacher in Singapore and our children in Australia live at the same time, where they had two teachers on both sides, and the children would be able to interact with each other. Yeah, the children in Singapore would be sharing the unique things about Singapore culture, and the children in our young champs in Sydney centers, of MindChamps centers in Sydney, were able to share the unique, cultural things about Australia, and the engagement between each other truly was inspiring. To see young children of 4 or 5 years old discussing concepts with each other on the other side of the world, and that's what really engaged them. True. But we have to train the teachers how to lead that whole process, not just put them on screen and watch each other. So it's not just about screen time; it's about interactive engagement, creating curiosity.
Awesome answer.
And I would say in business is the same.
Okay, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, David Chiem, and sharing your inspiring stories and insights into the MindChamps movement. So, so David, it's truly amazing to see how you've turned an idea into a global movement that's changing the education landscape worldwide. So I wish you continued success in your future endeavors, and we hope our listeners will have a good learning, learn something valuable today. So stay tuned for more exciting guests and topics on our podcast. Thank you.